Hi everyone, this is part 2 of my ACES in After Effects tutorials. If you missed the first part, the link to that is in the description below. In that, I go over some basic render settings in Redshift and a simplified workflow for using ACES color space inside of After Effects. In this one, I'm going to go over converting textures into ACEScg and then also comping some CG into live action footage. So let's jump in. All right, so we're back in Cinema 4D, and let's say I'm going to take this scene here, I'll hit render, and we want to turn it into a legitimate, by-the-book, ACES workflow render. So right now I don't have my dome light on, but I have a standard dome light with just a standard HDR in there. It's one of those free ones. And okay, so first thing, we need to transform our HDR into an ACEScg HDR. So how do we do that? Well, luckily for us, let me stop this. There's a great utility that you can download. There's a link in the description below. And this is the Pico color space converter from Liam Khalid. I think I'm pronouncing that right, Liam Khalid. So yeah, check out that link and download this. So basically this takes our files and converts them into ACES color space. We have the target color space down here as ACEScg, which is what we want. There's some other ones down here, but we're going to stick with ACEScg. So really, this couldn't be any simpler. We just take our HDR that we want to convert. So I'm just going to drag it over into this area here. And we need to select it, and we need to decide which conversion we want to use. So we have utility linear sRGB, utility texture, sRGB, utility texture Rec 709, utility raw. There's some other ones down there. But for this image here, this HDR, which is an EXR file format, that's going to be a linear image, right? Because EXRs don't have a gamma curve applied. It's linear luminance data or linear gamma with most likely an sRGB color space, sRGB color primaries. So we're going to choose utility linear sRGB, and we're going to say apply to selection. So now you can see that little icon changed, and now we have sRGB linear attached to this. Now down here, we're going to export this as an EXR. We can use 16-bit half float as zip compression. That's great. And we'll just say export at the same location. And we'll hit this little play button down here and converting file, and it's done. So let's hop back into Cinema 4D, and I will just navigate over to where that file is. Okay, I'm just going to select that and hit open. And no, we don't need that there. And you can see here that it's the same file name, but afterwards it has a underscore ACEScg EXR. So our converter program put a little tag on the end to let us know that this is our ACES version. Okay, so here's the render. And just to be sure here, I'm just still in the standard sRGB display mode for now. But if I hit render, okay, so in this instance, it's pretty subtle. I don't even know if there's a real noticeable difference here. Most likely has to do with the colors in the image that we're converting. This is an interior bathroom, which is pretty neutral in color, so we may not notice the difference. Now, in order to actually view this correctly, we need to go in and set up our ACES view transform. So we're going to say display mode, go down to OCIO, and I already have this set up to look at my config file, but if you're just starting this, you're going to have to navigate over to where you've saved your OpenColor.io configs and your latest ACES config. And right now that's ACES 1.2. And you just want to select that config.ocio file and hit open. I'll hit render again, but you can already see the difference in the colors from our little sticks. Okay, so right now, all the textures in the scene are just standard color textures. There are no texture files that are giving any of these any color data. I've got some like scratches, I think, on the metal, but all of these are just black and white. So none of those need to be converted. The only files that we need to convert into ACES color space are ones with color data in them. So But for instance, let me just clarify that. Now I do have a, see on some of these, like a normal map, for instance. I don't know if I have one in this scene, but a normal map, even though it's colorful, that doesn't qualify as something with color data in it. That's still used as just straight up data. So what we need to do in that case is same thing we do with any of these. For like this overlay scratches, just want to make sure you're using a gamma override, enable it to make sure the gamma is set to 1. So normal maps, we just leave alone. Roughness, displacement, anything like that that's just data, we can leave alone. Now, a diffuse map, a translucency texture, for instance, leaves or plants, that would need to be converted. We need to transform that color information into ACEScg. So in order to do that, I'm going to bring in, let's say I want to add a photograph to this. I'm just going to pick a photo of mine. So let's say we want to add this photo into our scene. So I'm just going to make a plane and set this to Z- and scale it down and move it and move it over. And I'm going to go look at our dimensions of this photo. Okay, so let's see here on the plane. Let's make this a width of, let's see, so the dimensions are 3,779 pixels by 5,669 pixels. Let's do 37.79 for the width, and the height we'll do 56.69. Okay, great. So now we have those dimensions. All right, let's just angle this a little bit. We've got like, oops. Okay, I'm gonna make a new material and just drag a texture in here and just pull my JPEG. Nope. And let me just put that right into the diffuse and change nothing else. I'm gonna hit render. Oh, and I need to apply that to my plane. And just for clarity, I'm gonna go down and turn off reflection for now, just so we can see the material a little bit clearer. Okay, so you can see in the render view here how much more saturated this is than the image. These greens are sort of neon in here. So we need to convert this JPEG into ACEScg in order to display these colors correctly. All right, so let's go back to our color converter, and I'm just going to drag this JPEG in, and can I just delete this? Yeah, okay, just hit delete. So we're only dealing with this one. So now, for this case, I want to use not the linear sRGB, but utility texture sRGB. I know that this is not a linear image. I took this with a camera. This is in sRGB color space, and I know it has that gamma curve applied to it in order to look correct on our monitor. So we need to select utility texture sRGB. And we will convert this into an EXR, have float, ACEScg in the same location, and I will hit play. Oh, excuse me, first we need to apply this utility to our selection. Now our little icon is updated, and hit play. Okay, that's done. Now I just want to update this texture. So if I go over here, you can see this is my JPEG, and now we have another one with ACEScg.exr, and we want to select this one instead. We'll hit open. No. And we can see the difference. Actually, let me go back. Let me stop this. Let's go back and do a comparison. Okay. Yeah, for this texture, we do want, we don't want to override the gamma to 1. We want to keep this. This is our original JPEG, which is sRGB. So there's no reason this has to be so small. Let's make this bigger. Okay. So now this is incorrect. We've got just a regular JPEG in here. This hasn't been converted to ACES. So this will be our before. Okay, let me just pause this and we'll just save this to the picture viewer. Just make it 100%. Okay, and we'll go back and select our ACES version. No, and hit render. Okay, send that over to the picture viewer, and now we can go back and forth between these. You see the difference. So you can see what the ACES view transform is doing to these colors when it expects it to be in a much wider color space. So these colors are being completely exaggerated and oversaturated. But if we transform that JPEG into ACES color space, now we get a correct looking JPEG. So if I pull in this over here, you can see we've got a pretty good match. You also have to remember, this is being lit by an HDRI. And while the HDRI is still ACEScg, it's still this photograph, I'm doing air quotes, you can't see it, but this photograph is still in this environment. The colors from these sticks, the color cast from the HDRI is still playing a part in this image. So looking at these and like maybe testing color values is not really a good test to make sure, oh, hey, this is exactly right. Because you have to remember that this is being lit with, you know, GI, or we have bounces coming up off the floor with these other objects, and the color cast from the HDRI, you know, that's not a completely neutral, as far as I know, HDRI. But we can get what we expect to look like a correct looking image. If this JPEG was printed out and placed in this environment, that's what it would look like. So another thing we can do here, I'll do real quick, is I'll just move this over and maybe just copy it and rotate it, is pull in a X-Rite color checker into this scene. And I downloaded this. I will have a link in the description of where you can download this. This was downloaded as an EXR that is already in the ACEScg color space. So I can just take a texture and pull in the ACEScg color checker 2014 EXR and say nope. And we will put that right on the diffuse color. And again, I'm going to take the reflection down so we can look at this. I'm just going to drag that onto the plane. This may be kind of stretched out, so I didn't get the exact dimensions, but we'll see. Ah, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so we can see here, looks pretty good. Our scene may be a little bright. You know, our dome light is set at a little bit higher than normal exposure, so I can bring this down a little bit and hit re-render. I'm just going by the way I know the color checker to look. You know, obviously if this was for a real project, you want to make sure that you're exposing your scene properly with this color checker and checking the values of these on export, and making sure that your sRGB values for each of these are pretty close. Again, it's going to be scene dependent. You know, we can remove everything in the scene except for the HDR and do another test to make sure our scene isn't contributing to any sort of color casts or, you know, bounce light or something that's going to influence our exposure. But in this case, you know, this is just nothing. It doesn't matter. But this, you know, again, I just want to reiterate that the colors choices I made here are just to taste. So these, yeah. So this here, this is just a ramp with a color user data for the color of these clones. And I'm just putting that into a ramp to change these colors. And these are just selected by me, you know, randomly to taste. So if I like, oh, hey, maybe this teal is a little bit too vibrant, or this green
is a little bit too vibrant, I would just come in and, take the exposure, or not the exposure, the saturation down. And I'm just basing this on my eye. Of course, now if you had to match colors, like real world colors, that gets to be a little bit trickier. You could potentially make a JPEG of the color, the correct color, and then transform that using the color converter. And you would go from your texture sRGB into ACEScg and use that as the diffuse color. That's a potential way to do this, because we are still picking our colors in Cinema 4D in sRGB. That's why these are going to look very, very different. They're going to get much more saturated in this ACEScg color space than they would in just the regular sRGB. So it is just still sort of like a push and pull, of just like selecting a color down here and seeing what it looks like up in our viewport in ACES. And so the rest of this is similar to what I talked about in the first part, in the last tutorial, where if we were going to render this out, we'd want to make sure to turn off our Redshift post effects color management. If you wanted to, the bloom and flare could be on. But we would just want to check this off. And now we're back to an uncolor managed output. So we're just going to use this as sort of like a quote raw image. That is to say that if you weren't planning on doing any post work, you could leave this on and render this out as a JPEG and post it. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. That's completely fine. You just lose the ability to adjust the exposure or adjust colors within ACES when you do this, because this clamps all the values. So we don't get that like high dynamic range anymore. We get just a clamped, regular. I mean, as a JPEG, of course, we don't have that latitude anyway. But even if you did this and saved it as an EXR, like I talked about in the first tutorial, we lose all that extra data. So we want to uncheck this if we're going to do work outside of Cinema 4D. And we would save this as an OpenEXR and depth 16, but we want to check, use 16-bit float. And we could hit render. And then we'd be able to take this into After Effects or DaVinci or wherever we're editing and make adjustments or comp new things on top of it. So that's pretty much it. As long as you've converted any color information that you're rendering out in your scene into ACEScg and then output this as an EXR without the Redshift color management on, you're working in ACES. You've done it. Just have to remember to convert the images appropriately. So that has to fit what you're putting in. If you had a linear sRGB EXR from some other, I'm not even sure if this is how it works. I don't use Substance Painter or anything like that, but just be aware if you're exporting textures or something you've made from another program or from somewhere else, that if it's an EXR, most likely that's going to be a linear sRGB transform. So linear sRGB into ACEScg. If it's a texture, just a standard texture like from the internet with color information like your diffuse or translucency, then you would want to use sRGB texture to ACEScg. Real quickly, I do want to mention, there's been some talk of, for client work or something that's very color critical, of utilizing an output transform as the input, where you would take, I want this image to be exactly right. I want all these colors to be exactly right. So what I'll do is, instead of using utility texture.sRGB, you would use the output transform, the transform we're using in After Effects, to go from ACEScg into sRGB, to use that as the input, if that makes sense. So basically you're saying, use this exactly as it is inside the render. But that's incorrect. That's not a good way to do this, because what's going to happen is these colors are not going to interact with your scene correctly. And there's some good discussions about this on the ACES Central forum. about what problems you could run into if you were utilizing this. And I think a lot of people in there were wishing this method of using an output display transform as an input device transform would just go away. It just leads to more problems in the long run. All right, so I thought it'd be kind of nice to go over a project where I would be comping CG over some live action footage. So what I've done is I'm gonna head over into After Effects here, and I've got some footage that I shot. Let me, make sure this is right. Okay. I've got some footage that I shot with a Sony camera. So I've shot this in S-Log and brought this in and did a quick edit. And that's just a few different scenes. So I thought we could use this to make some sort of animation and utilize ACES and comp it all back together in After Effects. So I've just got a few different scenes here. And so we'll take this edit and we'll go into Cinema 4D and do our animation. Then we'll bring all the animation back in here and comp it together. So real quick, I'm going to assume you've either shot this yourself or you're getting this from a potential client. So potentially they could be sending you something like this, like an S-Log edit final. We're just going to say, this came from a client. This is the footage that we need to comp our CG into. And right off the bat, I do want to say that this is not the only way to tackle this. There are many ways to do this, and I'm sure some of you will be cringing at the way I lay this out or how I approach this. But this is just a method that has worked for me. So in no way am I saying that this is the only workflow to get this done. So basically what I'll do is I'll just kind of start over and I'll drag this into a new comp. And just to reiterate, I do have use display color management on, and our project settings are at the default with the color, or my default anyway, just sRGB and 32-bit per channel float, and linearize working space is on. So, okay. Right off the bat, when we look at this in our project, we can see that the profile for this is Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. But I know that this was shot on a Sony camera using S-Log 2. So it's not in Rec 709. So that's incorrect. And we can correct for that in a couple ways, but I think the easiest thing is to just go to Interpret Footage, Main, go to Color Management, and do Preserve RGB. So disable color management for this and hit OK. So now this looks all washed out because we have our use display color management on. If I check that off real quick, we're back to the way this looks, but we want to leave this on. So the way I would tackle this, we've got this sent over to us in a really nice way. We've got our scene, the part that we're working on, has been sent over to us, and starting with 1001 is our first frame, and we go through all the cuts to our last frame where we'll end here on 1450. So what I would do is just start to go to the scene cuts. I'll just go page down. Here we go. So this scene. And I'll hit Control-Shift-D to cut there and make a new layer. And I'll go to the next scene. And Control-Shift-D, or I believe Command-Shift-D on a Mac to do a new layer. There. Okay, now that I've got these split up into different shots, we've got our first shot, second, third, fourth, and it looks like in this edit we go back to the third shot. So the next thing I would do, just for organizational purposes, is write down the length of each of these shots. So just in a text file, you shot one from 1001 to 1128. And then the next shot, 1129 to this. Because we're going to use that in Cinema 4D. So this is where this could be done a bunch of different ways. But this workflow is assuming that this edit is completely locked. There's no changes going to be made to this edit, and we are set to just start animating right on top of it. sometimes you'll get footage where each clip is split up and you'll have handles on either side, like 10 or 15 frames or so on either side of these edits, just so that the editor has room later on to shift the cuts or extend a scene a little bit if need be. Then this whole thing would be slightly different. All right, so I've done this, and what I will do is pre-comp this first one, and we'll just do pre-compose, and we'll just call this shot 1. And I can double click on shot 1. I'm going to add a new layer, and we'll call this S-log to ACEScg. I'm going to add the open color IO effect, and a link to that is down in the description. You need to download this plugin in order to get open color and ACES working in After Effects. After Effects doesn't have anything built in yet to handle this, so have to download the plugin. Need to go to my ACEScg download. Link to that is also in the description. Now for the input space, we need to go to input. We go down to Sony, and I shot S-log2 in the S-gamut. There's some other options. You could do S-log3 and S-gamut 3 cine. I just did S-log2 S-gamut, so I know that is correct. And I want to put the output space to ACEScg. So now we've transformed this from S-log into ACEScg. Now, back in our final, we see this looks much different than the next scene, but it doesn't look right. So what we need to do is do that for the rest of these. Add that Open Color IO plugin layer up above and transform these from S-log into ACEScg. And I'll just go ahead and do that real quickly and fast forward. Okay, so all of these have their new layers applied. So now, back in our main comp, let me just go and change this comp main. Okay, now in this composition, I want to add a new adjustment layer and call this ACEScg to sRGB. Do Open Color IO again. Select our config. And this time we're going to go from ACEScg to whatever output we're going to. In this case, just for the internet. So I'm going to do output sRGB. And again, this looks washed out, but we need to add our gamma fix to this. We'll call this sRGB gamma fix and apply the color profile converter. And we want to go from sRGB to sRGB. Not changing anything, but we do want to select linearize output profile. And again, all that's doing is, without this on, this looks too bright because After Effects is applying a gamma curve because we have the use color management on. So in this case, we want to keep that on because I think it's easier. But basically now, because we're using this OCIO plugin, we're saying output to sRGB, that's applying the sRGB gamma curve. And then After Effects, not knowing this is a plugin, it doesn't know what we're doing. It's like, hey, you're going to need to view this correctly on your sRGB monitor. So here's a gamma curve, all fixed. But it doesn't realize it's applying another one on top of it. So we need to add a new layer and get rid of that extra sRGB gamma curve by selecting linearize output. Even though in this case we're not really linearizing it, we're just removing one of those gamma curves. So it's doing an inverse curve, an inverse transfer function. And normally this would be going back to just linear gamma, but in this case, we're going back to the gamma being applied by our OCIO. So we've removed our double gamma curve, and now we're back to sRGB. So we go from log to ACES and to ACES to sRGB. Now, right above our shots here and below our ACEScg is where we can use any sort of color correction or exposure correction effects like blur effects or things like that. We want to utilize that inside the ACES space. And because we've converted these to ACES in the pre-comp, it's going to happen right here. So I can add a new adjustment layer and Call this exposure and apply an exposure. And let's bring this down. So I shot this overexposed. I don't have too much experience shooting in S-Log, but I was reading about it in order to get less noise in the shadows, to overexpose. I do think I probably went a little bit too far in my S-Log overexposure, because I think I kind of went a little bit far here and I think kind of blew out the sky, which is unfortunate, but I think it looks okay. But you can see it just how much latitude I have here. I can bring this down quite a bit, a couple stops. It's still holding up really nicely, and I can go even higher exposure than our normal overexposure, and it still looks pretty good. Looks as though we're exposing in the scene. So we're utilizing all that nice high dynamic range that ACES gives us. So I'm gonna drop this back down to like, I don't know, -1, something like that. Now I have another scene here where I was playing around with this. Basically, I've just done the exact same steps and just added some color correction and some vignette, and done the same thing back to sRGB. So this is sort of my look, or my grade I'm gonna go with for this, but if I turn all this off, we'll see exactly what we had on our main comp. So these are the same. So we'll just stick with this one. It's the same thing. I've just pre-comped all these clips that I shot right from the camera and added the adjustment layers on top. Okay, so now taking this into cinema. The way I would do this, and the way I've done this in the past, is just export out an image sequence that I can play back utilizing the dome light. If I go to the dome light here, you can see we have the option for a backplate. I'll just hop over to my scene right now, and I'll show you what I've done. So I've got this sort of blobby thing here. Basically what I'm doing here in the dome light is utilizing an HDRI that I shot right there in the scene. So I have that here, and I've already converted it into ACES. So I did that with my Canon camera and shot the HDRI, and then brought it in, all those images, into PT-GUI, stitched them all together, made the file, saved it out, and then dropped it into this image converter here and converted it into ACEScg. And that's what we have here. Also, in this dome light, I've got the backplate enabled, and the backplate is this image sequence rendered out, and I've rendered that out basically from here, but I've just left this as all of these converted to ACEScg, and then had my comp set the way I wanted it, and then just went to composition, add to render queue, and selected open EXR, and just left this at floating point, RGB. And then for color management, I did just select preserve RGB. I don't want to use the output profile sRGB. I want to keep this exactly how it is without any After Effects interference. So in this case, because I want to export this out as like an ACES EXR file sequence, I want to preserve RGB on export. So I hit OK, and then we have our file name and frame number EXR. So I've selected that for the background, and for animation, we need to set the animation mode to simple, and you can do detect frames, and it's detected our start frame at 1001 and our end frame at 1450. And I have my start frame here at 1001 and our end frame at 1450. Now, in order for this to start at the right time, this is going to want to start at frame 0. So we need to set the range here under timing from frame, which would just start at Cinema 4D's frame 0 and be done by the time we get to 1001. So we need to set this to range and then select 1001 as our start time and 1450 as our end time. That way, when we hit render on this, we're seeing the first frame as the background. All right, let me pause that here. And I need to go to my settings, and we need to change the displayed mode from sRGB back to our OCIO, ACES config. And we'll go back to sRGB. And the goal here is I want to see this in the scene. I want to be able to see this thing I'm making here interacting with the scene and get it pretty close. I wanted the background to look pretty close. And if we don't convert this background to ACEScg, the colors are going to be off. And when I adjust the dome light, I'm not going to get a good sense of how bright to make this dome light in the scene. You can see I have the dome light cranked up to like 4.674. The exposure's that high. My HDRI comes in pretty dark. It's just the way I shot it and didn't adjust for that when I exported it out of PT GUI, so it needs this exposure bump. Now, I will admit, I cannot believe I did this. I jumped right in, I was borrowing the camera and was rushing, and I did not shoot a color checker chart or a gray card. I just went at it, and the sun was going down, and I knew I had to work quickly. So ideally, I would have done that. I would have placed my color checker or a gray card or some sort of reference point in the scene, probably like kind of down on the ground near the tripod or something like that. So if I go into my dome light and disable this backplate, be able to see the HDRI itself. So you can see here, like I could have just put like a color checker down here on the ground or something, and that way I had a reference point and I could adjust the exposure based on that color checker. And ideally I also would have shot a color checker with the Sony camera at the beginning and had that as a reference and made sure that the white balances matched. I did none of those things, unfortunately, so it's still fine. It's not ideal, but it just means that potentially we would have to do a little bit more tweaking in the comp just to get the exposure right later on, and maybe some color changes. It's doable, but it's just not ideal. Ideally, you would have those the color checker as a reference and have a white balance set for both of them, both the footage, the live action footage, and the HDRI image. So just undo that and turn the backplate back on. So a couple things. This first scene, if we go back into After Effects, you'll notice that this has a camera movement to it, and all I've done there is just tracked that camera. I just did it in After Effects. After you get that camera track, you just export the camera. You can do this here. Once you have your camera done, you can do... Just go to export and then Maxon Cinema 4D exporter and save that out. And that's what I've used here. This is my 3D camera tracker. And I'll show you. And as this plays, you can see the keyframes. The camera is tilting up with the camera in real life. And again, for the most part, this scene is just me picking colors and seeing how they look and adjusting them to taste. I did use a stick in this. This guy's holding a stick he found in the yard, I guess. I don't know. But to be honest, I did not even convert this into ACES. All I did was just use Redshift color correct and take the saturation down to 0.68 and the gamma up a little bit. And really all I was doing was just trying to match this stick to the way the sticks looked in the scene. Technically that's not correct. So I guess, if we wanted to, we could just do that. We could take this, so this wood stick texture. This is just as easy as finding it over here, and here we go. So it looks like it's a TGA format, and it doesn't look like the color space converter likes TGA files. So just open up Photoshop real quick and do a preliminary conversion. Okay, and just file, save as, do JPEG, sRGB is fine. Okay. Now let's take the JPEG, drag it over. There we go. And we want to do utility, texture, sRGB, same location to ACEScg, and apply to selection, and hit OK. Okay, so let's go directly in. We'll bypass the color correction that I did manually. And this is how it is with the incorrect color, just standard color. You can see how saturated it is. So I'm curious to see what this looks like if we change it over into the ACES version. And we will select that. Yeah, wood stick, EXR, open. Okay, you can see that's much less saturated. That looks pretty good. Let's go back to, yeah, I mean, I think it looks fine. I also thought the the other way looked fine as well, but technically this is correct. And if you had very color sensitive assets you were working with where you needed to match things, this would be the way to do it. And just get rid of the color correct. Otherwise, the rest of this is just, yeah, colors. I can open up the our hero shader graph here. And most of this is just max on noises for the bump and the displacement. There's some hair here. That's just a color that I've added this material on top of. I'm not using the regular Redshift hair material. I'm just using a standard material with some bump and some reflection roughness. This is it's got some mix materials going on here. So I'm mixing 3 different materials. The main one being a subsurface scattering. And that is, yeah, that is this material here. And I'm using a ramp, a gradient in the subsurface material. Got kind of a subtle gradient from the bottom up to the top. And this mess here is the reflection roughness, and that consists of it. I do have one texture that I am using. It's just like scribbles in Photoshop. And the only other thing I'm using here is another texture where I wanted to break up the texture on him a little bit. So I just went into Photoshop and made just some dots. I was trying to do that with some noises. I can show you here something similar with just overlaying some Maxon noises, but I was having a hard time with this, the UV mapping on this. And this is just a volume builder and a volume mesher. And, as you know, this is being calculated as a volume. So UVs are just what you get. You can't UV unwrap this thing because it's still live. The geometry is changing as this moves through space. So, just for this sample, I'm not, baking anything out and then reanimating, which is something I would probably do in order to get proper UVs. But in this case, I just sort of was trying to work around it. And so I was spending a lot more time than I thought was necessary on something like this when I thought, it's probably just easier to take 20 seconds and go into Photoshop and draw these dots how I wanted it. And then just a matter of using the offset here in order to move this where I wanted it and scale it how I wanted it. So ended up being a lot quicker. So that's basically this material. And so one of the reasons I exported out an image sequence was so that this played back in the viewport correctly. So I'm going to turn off all this stuff and just jump ahead. And you can see that the viewport updates with our edit. And the reason why I wrote down the frame numbers for each scene was that I'm utilizing a stage object, and I'm just animating between different cameras. And if I go out here, you can see that I've got multiple cameras set up. Let me just hide this spherical field. And so I've got this lined up the way I shot this, and just went in and sort of made a camera fit what I thought was appropriate for each of these shots. So, you can see that this is sort of replicating the placement I had in real life where I moved forward and angled up in this case and, got real close here. And so I'm just trying to match these camera angles so I can animate this blobby thing one time and automatically have my scene switch to the different cameras as the timeline plays. For me, that's just the simplest workflow that I could find, but this is assuming that the edit won't change and you wouldn't have to go back in and add a couple of frames, like right before this scene changes because that would be a lot more work and would require, if there was even the slightest chance that you would need to have like a longer shot here or there would be a re-edit, I wouldn't set it up this way. I would set it up with a master animation file and then use XRefs in different projects and just keep it separate. That's one way to do it. That's probably the way I would go. But for this case, I'm just doing it all in one shot, and I know the client's going to be happy because it's me. So now that I've got that set up, I've got these things animated and I've got things looking how I want. Go back to the main scene. So what I did here in order to make sure things were working correctly or getting it, close to how I wanted it, I rendered out just a viewport render, the whole thing, and just sort of as an animatic, just to make sure. So just some really quick renders to look at it with the footage. And the way I did that, I actually went into my preferences, and I think there's a way to turn off this gradient. I don't really know. So all I did was just go and pick a bright color that would work for me, and then just copied it and then went to the background gradient too and pasted it, and that's just in preferences under scheme colors, editor colors, just the background gradients. So now I have a sort of garish scene, and I render this out just geometry only with my little stick in there. And so I have I usually just set this not to save, and I just output. Now my footage is 4K, and I am going to just keep this whole project 4K. So I'll render out all frames in this viewport setting, and then I hop back in. I can open that up, and I've got this here, and we can take a look at, let me just go back into our comp main, and I will drag this in, and I'm going to put that above our gamma fix. So this is just right on top. Basically, I want to use this background. I want to key it out just to have like an alpha channel. So really quickly, I can just use key light, and it doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to work pretty well. And if I hit play, I'll let this render and come back. It's got a pretty good camera track there, and then it's just automatically cutting to each of the scenes. We'll go with that. So now if I notice something I didn't like, I would just go back in and, make the adjustment, re-render this, overwrite that animatic MP4, and just load it back in and take a look and make sure it's exactly how I want it. But I thought that was kind of a nice way of kind of getting a quick alpha channel out of a viewport render. I don't know of a way otherwise to do that. There may be a way, but just selecting a really bright color that is not in one of your object colors and just keying it out. Just turn that off, and we'll go back to this other main one here. And I can bring in, so I've started to render this out. I'll only do like a small section of this for now, but basically said, okay, happy with how this looks. It's time to render this out. And in this case, I'm not doing multi-passes. I just did the main pass, but I did add a shadow pass, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, let me stop this here. So this geometry here is under my scene here, and that's the shadow matte. It's a plane that I've just sort of moved the geometry around and beveled this edge just to mimic this curvy wall here, and just up into the dirt a little bit to catch the shadow. So I have the shadow matte plane with a Redshift object tag on it, and under the matte tab, I have override enabled, and I've enabled this and show background and apply to secondary rays. And I've also come down here and made these settings. So enabled and receive shadows from mattes and effects alpha, transparency 0, the alpha top is 0. So basically, we don't see it here in the scene except for the shadow that this blobby thing here casts, and it casts up over the wall. If I go to, I only have beauty. If I go to the AOV passes here, I only have the beauty and shadows, and this is the shadows pass. Now, I am also getting the shadows from, this our hero here, but But the way I'm going to be comping this, that doesn't matter. If it did matter, I could also enable an object ID, which I've done here, and then add another AOV if I need to. If I need to single this out, whoops. Let's go to AOV, AOV manager, and along with the beauty and shadows, I could add an object ID to this and hit render. Whoops, I need to, in order to see the object ID, I need to enable bucket rendering. Okay, yeah, so now we have a matte if we need to single out our shadow catcher layer here. So we've got the beauty, shadows, and the matte if we need to isolate it. The way I'm doing this in After Effects, I don't need to do that, and I'll show you in a minute. So like always, the only thing we need to do is under Redshift Post Effects, under Color Management, uncheck Enabled, and save. We want to save under the Multipass, not up here. And one thing to note, I am leaving this Enable background on, and I have, if we look at our alpha channel here, this is our alpha channel. So in the dome light, I have this set up so that the background is not taking over the alpha. So we can get a nice alpha matte for our hero here. What I've found is I leave straight alpha unchecked. I haven't done too much research on this. I just know that this works. I need to go back in and really test this to see if it still works with straight alpha checked. But I leave straight alpha unchecked, and I'll show you in After Effects what happens here. So I have alpha channel enabled, straight alpha unchecked, open EXR, 16-bit, but 16-bit float. And we are ready to go. Just double check, color management is off, and output all frames, and we can just hit render. So I've already got that rendered out, and I can just go and import that. So we open up our EXR sequence and select it and go up to File, Create Pro EXR Layer Comps. And I just need the shadow layer out of this, along with our EXR sequence. So I'm going to drop the EXR sequence into our comp right in between our color correction layers and the background. So put that there, and if I turn everything back on, see that works out pretty nicely. Because we're doing all the color correction on top of this comp, I can turn that off. You can see this is without the color correction. So yeah, I think it's a good way to help that blend in a little bit more. So you're doing the color correction over the CG inside the ACES sandwich here we've got. So we've got this already in ACES, and our EXR sequence is coming in as ACEScg. So all we need to do is convert the ACEScg to sRGB and do the gamma fix, which is happening here on the top already. So as soon as we drop this in, it's looking pretty correct. So if I go to 100% here, I want to show you something. You can see there's a subtle sort of halo around this. And if I go to interpret footage main, this is set to pre-multiplied, which you think would be correct, and it may be correct. The way we rendered this out, we did not render it out with a straight alpha, but if I do select straight alpha and hit OK, that goes away, and this is immediately all cleaned up. And to me, that looks perfect, even with the hair here. See these fine little hairs, no halo around it. So that's worked really well for me. I'm not sure exactly why. If you know why that's happening, leave a message down in the comments. Now, I know working inside ACES can bring some trouble with like Luma mats and alpha mats. It has to do with the way that ACES deals with highlights. So it basically, ACES is taking like a high dynamic range and then shrinking it down into low dynamic range. But our Luma mats and alpha mats work with white to black. And so if white on these fringes isn't pure white anymore, it can cause some problems. So I know there's some workarounds like that in the forums, but in this case, I haven't had the need to look into them. This has worked fine for me. So next, I did want to show you how I set up the shadows. So I will go up and grab my shadow source and bring that down underneath my EXR comp. And let's double click this and take a look. So This has happened to me here, and I don't like this. This is taking the alpha channel and using that for the shadows. So now we're only getting the shadows on our hero blob here. We don't get the shadows we should. If I select the alpha as the green of the shadows, I get this back. I don't know a way of saying none here, I don't like that. Just like ignore, please ignore. Like copy just keeps the alpha of the original EXR sequence. And so I don't know, there's not like a none option here. Really a bummer. I mean, the only other thing I can think of is to re-import the footage and say, ignore the alpha and then make the layer comps. But in this case, if I select just one of the shadows, this is good enough. One of the shadow channels, shadows green works, shadows blue would work. It's fine. So I'll do shadows blue. If someone has a good way around this, other than re-importing and ignoring the alpha, I'm all ears. Let me know in the comments. But back to our main. And now we see this come in and this looks crazy. So what do we do with this? So I'm not sure the technically correct workflow for this, but this is how I do it. I would make a new adjustment layer and I'm going to call this shadows. And I'm going to add an exposure adjustment. And I'll bring this down. I don't even know. Like, I'll just do like 0.63 right now. And I'm going to bring this below the shadow source. And I'm going to select on the track matte, I'm going to select Lumetri shadow source. So basically I want to use the highlights of this layer to reveal my shadows adjustment layer. So now this adjustment layer for shadows here is only showing up on the light parts of the layer above it on the shadow source. If I turn this off, shadow goes away, and turn this on, and now I have a shadow here, which looks like I can probably bring this exposure down a little bit, darken it up. So you can see here another error that I made. If I go back to my shadow source, I didn't extend this far enough up, and so our shadow from our blob is extending past this, creating a harsh line. What I could do is just add a new solid, make it black, and just do a mask over that and adjust the feather. And the only thing is I would have to animate this as this moved up or track it, or, you know, don't make this mistake to begin with. You could also add, if you needed to, adjust the color of the shadow. I didn't use any reflection in this matte. It's just for the shadow. So if I did want to add like make it a little bit cooler, I could go back in and just in the shadows adjustment layer, you know, add a curves, and maybe just take down the red a little bit. Another thing here, I mean, I could pre-comp this hero here, or if I needed to do any adjustments to this layer to help it blend into the background. Like for instance, if I thought, oh, you know what, maybe he's a little too, I don't know, bright. I think it looks okay. But for instance, if he was, you know, a little bit too bright, I could just add an exposure adjustment right onto the sequence and adjust this thing as needed. Just bring the exposure down just to help him, you know, if we needed to have him blend in, although I think it's fine. But we have that option here to add the adjustments directly to this, or pre-comp it and add layers, adjustment layers, and, you know, blend those. The other thing I would probably do in this case is add a motion blur layer. I didn't render out any motion blur in Redshift, so it's the same thing here. I would just add a real smart motion blur to this, and I'll probably just leave it default and see how it looks. Okay. So that's as far as I got on the render. So yeah, I think it's looking pretty good. I will say that orange with this grade on it, I've taken a lot of the blue out of this image. So that's one thing where I would probably come back and add another adjustment of hue and saturation, and just select the reds and sort of tweak this a little bit here. Let me just drag this down to only, let me make sure I'm getting what I want here. Yeah, maybe that, and maybe lighten it up a little bit. Yeah, probably something like that. The other thing I will mention, I have a color correct layer here where I'm using the Lumetri color effect. This kind of works, but not everything works, I don't think. I feel like this breaks down in a few areas, like with the curves or with like highlights and like the blacks. I don't think this works too well with like being inside of ACES or, that extra color space or the extra high dynamic range. I'm not sure. It just seems like it doesn't quite work correctly in this workflow. I am using it here and it's okay, I think, but I'm skipping over the parts that I thought were weird. I'm doing some like hue and saturation adjustments, which I could do with just, regular old After Effects hue and saturation, and like the thing that I'm mostly using here is like a white balance adjustment, going from that sort of blue nighttime look to warming it up quite a bit. So I'm making this much more orangey yellow and a little bit more green with the tint. But yeah, just be wary of the Lumetri. Some of these things seem to not be right. Another thing with this workflow, I talked about it in the last tutorial, but sort of the standard go-to in this case would be to turn off all of After Effects' color management and change over the working color space to ACEScg. But one of the benefits to this way is that, let's say this is for a client and this is a promo video showing off this product. This is Jelly Benny Garden Savior, and you buy one of these things and they come and take care of your garden and clean up your yard. And the logo needs to come at the end of this thing, and it's been sent over. So let's import something here. Let's import a logo. All right, so here's a PNG from the client. Okay, great. So it just works. So these are the colors that it needs to be. This is being interpreted as an sRGB. And do a composition, save frame as file. If I exported this, as an MP4 or whatever, in this case, I'll just do a quick example of just sending this out as a JPEG. And I don't need to do anything special with color management. Just leave it as is. Okay. Okay, I open up my JPEG and you can see the output looks exactly like our viewport does here in After Effects. So there's no extra step needed for compositing an sRGB image on top of this. Now, if we weren't, using this method and we were in ACEScg color space, this wouldn't work out so well. Because basically what we'd be doing is we're saying After Effects don't manage any colors, we'll manage the colors. So we would need to do an extra step to convert this and make sure we're converting this into something that makes sense. So we could try it here. Let me show you. Project settings, let's change this to ACEScg and view, use display color management off. We don't use this sRGB gamma fix. And yeah, so now our background looks okay. But our PNG colors are all wrong. They're too dark. So I believe we'd probably have to do, let me see if this works. So I think, do we need to do our ACES? So it looks like, yeah, we would need to do a profile conversion on this PNG to go from ACEScg to sRGB. I think that would work. Let's do a test. And JPEG, and in this workflow, we do have to go over to color management and do preserve RGB. Okay, and do output test, AE, color management off. One thing I did forget to do in this workflow, we need to make sure that our ACES image sequence that we're bringing in we need to go up to color management and preserve. There we go. Now that's looking correct, I think. Let's redo the export. Color management, preserve, JPEG. Okay. Okay, so I just brought these two into After Effects and put them on top of each other here. And I apparently moved the logo from one to the other, but otherwise, you can see the colors are the same. So it's not so bad, but you know, you just have to remember if you're utilizing that workflow where you're turning all color management off, anything that comes in that would normally work just fine needs to be converted because you're working now in ACES with color management off. So you would just have to add a converter or an OCIO converter to this to go from ACES to sRGB. I'm just gonna revert this and go back. That's good, sRGB, okay, and display color management, right. And all of this is on, our gamma fixed layers on. So no extra steps needed in this workflow. You can just drop in any sRGB as long as it's above the layers where we're converting from one color space to another. So after this sRGB gamma fix, you can add this on top. I did want to mention, I went over a workflow of converting any textures or HDRIs into ACEScg utilizing this color profile converter, which is great. The latest couple versions of Redshift now offer the OSL, I think it's open shader language, open shading language, something like that. So that it does leave open the possibility of adding in a node right in here. So for instance, like this stick node, this stick texture, instead of going out and converting this to ACEScg, we could drop in one of these OSL nodes and have the conversion happen here inside the node tree. I have not experimented with this, and I guess I don't really know how it works. I'm a little confused by it. I don't know if there's a way to do that with HDRIs, with a dome light, perhaps opening up a shader graph. But I also don't know how robust the conversion is inside of this node. It's very important to pick the correct conversion if we're going from linear sRGB or texture sRGB. So I haven't played around with it, but yeah, if I find out anything and it's much easier, then I will let you know. But to be honest, I don't really find the color profile converter to be troublesome at all. I think it's really convenient and really fast, but that is for me in my workflow where I'm not utilizing a whole lot of like PBR textures or a lot of diffuse textures that need to be transferred over into ACES. I'm doing a lot of color choices just on the fly here, utilizing the color picker and the viewport. So, if you're doing very dense scenes with a lot of like kit bash stuff or like Quixel assets, then yeah, maybe that becomes more cumbersome, and a node inside the shader graph converting your textures to ACES would be, preferred. I did want to mention too, I didn't render out Multipass, but just like I showed in the last tutorial, it's just the same method really. The only difference being instead of just one EXR here, there's the whole list of all of your passes would just go right below it. So whatever passes you have, added together in the correct way, in the correct blending mode, set to add or linear dodge. And as long as those are all happening here underneath the conversion to sRGB from ACEScg, then it'll work out fine. So that pretty much covers it. I know it can be a little daunting. There seems like there's a lot of steps. And definitely check out the other tutorials that I have listed down in the description. I think it becomes much more manageable, and I feel like I really believe that the benefits of using this are like really game changing in terms of the quality of renders, the realism, and the ease of comping CG into live action. But really the way we're able to utilize ACES in order to light our scenes in a much more realistic manner and just really cranking the brightness up on those lights and letting the light bounce around our scene more, I think is really beneficial and can show improvements even in renders that aren't being comped in or even taken into After Effects. So just utilizing ACES right out of Redshift. Yeah, so I think that's it. If there are any questions, be sure to ask down in the comments below, and I will try to get to those. As always, thank you so much for sticking this out and watching these. I really appreciate it. Till next time, thanks everybody.